Chapter 1702. This battle could be said to be a cowardly one. The disparity in strength meant that the Portuguese and Spanish navies were doomed to complete defeat. On the port of Lisbon, the 5,000 Portuguese soldiers saw the scene of the two navies being completely destroyed. While everyone was shocked, the news was quickly conveyed to the rear. Then, the shocked kings of Portugal and Spain quickly issued an order to send land infantry to the port of Lisbon. Since they were no match for the enemy at sea, they had to defend the land. As long as they did not let the enemy land, the safety of the two countries would be guaranteed. Although they lost the joint fleet, the two kings did not feel that there was any danger. They even mocked Xianxia for only knowing how to show off at sea. If they directly went ashore after destroying the joint fleet, how could the 5,000 soldiers stop them? By now, Xianxia should have already reached the land, and the flames of war should be everywhere in Portugal. Now they were prepared. Almost all of the Portuguese army was mobilized, sending out 300,000 soldiers, and the Spanish army also sent out 200,000 soldiers. Together, they had 500,000 soldiers. How could they give the enemy a chance to go ashore? As long as the Xianxia navy could not go ashore, how long could they last at sea? In the end, the enemy would definitely withdraw. In this way, their defense would be successful. With this failure, the Xianxia navy would not casually attack them in the future. The two kings were still mocking the Xianxia navy for not having the ability to go ashore and not knowing how to seize the opportunity. However, they did not know that all of this was intentional by Gao Xiong. Of course, he could directly go ashore after destroying the Portuguese and Spanish navies. However, when he entered the hinterland of the two countries, he would inevitably have to face a large number of land forces. At that time, without the help of warships and cannons, it would be difficult to fight. How to severely damage or even destroy the land forces of the two countries was what Gao Xiong needed to consider. Therefore, he did not take the opportunity to go ashore. He wanted to give the other side time to mobilize their troops. In this way, a month passed. The other side prepared 500,000 soldiers on the shore of Lisbon, waiting for him to harvest. This also proved that Gao Xiong's decision was correct. Pass down the order. Everyone, have a good night's rest. Tomorrow morning, bombard Lisbon and prepare for the landing. When Gao Xiong saw that the other party was no longer recruiting, he knew that this should be all the strength they could muster in a short period of time. Even so, he didn't need to wait any longer. After all, the sixth young master was still waiting for his good news. The Xianxia navy had already ordered an all-out attack the next morning. Neither the Portuguese nor the Spanish army knew about this. The situation on the battlefield had determined that they would only be able to defend. They could only wait for Xianxia to join the battle or for her to leave. Maybe it was because the Xianxia navy didn't do anything in the past month. They didn't even bombard the shore with their cannons. This caused the armies of the two countries to have the misconception that Xianxi's navy had a limited number of artillery shells and soldiers. They no longer had the ability to attack the land. The reason why they did not leave immediately was probably because they were in a dilemma. They had completely underestimated the Xianxia navy's two armies and were not prepared at all. They gathered on the shore in twos and threes, chatting and talking about women. They had the attitude of a victor. The next morning, the weather was good, and the sky was clear. In the distance, the Portuguese and Spanish armies were also preparing to eat breakfast. When they were about to start a fire, the Xianxia navy moved. Under the bombardment of thousands of cannons, the two navies were caught off guard. Many soldiers didn't stay in the trenches. Of course, even if they stayed in the trenches, they didn't know the caliber of the Xianxia navy's cannons. The trenches were still too shallow to withstand the attack of the 150mm caliber cannons. When the cannons fell on the battlefield, they quickly plowed the land. The whole land was turned over, and the so-called Portuguese and Spanish allied forces were turned into bloody corpses and buried there. Such a powerful cannon fire was the first time in their lives. A total of 500,000 soldiers suffered a baptism of cannons. Just the first wave of attack caused more than 100,000 casualties. Many of them were directly killed by the explosion, and some were killed by the powerful cannons. They never knew that cannons could be so powerful. The soldiers of the Double Fang coalition army just lay on the ground out of fear. They didn't know how powerful the remaining power of the 150mm caliber cannonballs was. Each of them was shaken to the point that their internal organs ruptured and they died. There were also many soldiers who were far away, but because of the power of the cannons, They were injured by the shrapnel. They fell to the ground and cried out in pain. Hee. Prepare for the second wave of cannons, fire. Putting down the binoculars in his hand, Gao Xiong's face was full of smiles. Then he shouted again, and the deafening sound of cannons rang out again, extending towards the Allied forces. The soldiers who were lucky enough not to be hit by the cannons before were already stunned by the scene in front of them. They were still standing there with their eyes wide open, sighing at the powerful firepower of the Xianxia Navy. Above their heads, there was a wave of red light. Not good, this is a cannonball attack, run. An officer of the Portuguese army shouted in fright. It's just that his voice was already replaced by the rumbling of the cannons. Apart from himself, no one could hear him. Even if they could hear him, under the bombardment of thousands of cannons, where was a safe place? After the cannons spread out, they once again gave the Allied forces a thunderous blow. More than 100,000 soldiers were killed. Broken limbs were everywhere, and countless were injured. After 2 rounds of cannons, the cannons finally stopped. The current Allied forces were already in shambles. Apart from the casualties, there were less than 100,000 soldiers left. They were scattered all over the place. If they were to use cannons to attack, it would be like using cannons to kill mosquitoes. It would be a waste. At this time, the Marines could be used, and they could directly go ashore. At this moment, the 5-star Army's king of the land finally made his appearance. 6 CTZ. 99 main battle tanks jumped out from the deck of the Level 6 battleship Gao Xiong was on. They passed through the temporary iron bridge built by the engineers and smoothly arrived at the port of Lisbon, Portugal. Behind the rumbling king of the land, there were tens of thousands of soldiers from the cold front. They all carried the same Type 95 and charged towards the shore in large strides. The cannons rumbled, and the gunshots burst out. The soldiers who weren't covered by the cannons became live targets. When the Allied soldiers were still holding onto spears, sabers and spears, they surged forward. Lines of fire appeared several hundred meters away, turning into huge meat grinders. When tens of thousands of soldiers were bombarded and shot to death, the fighting spirit of the remaining soldiers of the Double Teeth Alliance finally collapsed. There was only one thought in their minds, and that was to escape. Run as far away as possible from these murderous demons. It was just like the scene when the 8-nation alliance set foot on China many years later. At this time, the 5-star Army's navy came ashore with unparalleled might, and the Tufeng alliance was completely defeated. Tens of thousands of Marines, under the leadership of the 6 tanks, smoothly captured Lisbon, and then chased the deserters of the Tufeng alliance into the hinterland of the Kingdom of Portugal. The advantage of firearms and years of hard training finally paid off. In less than a month, the entire Kingdom of Portugal was completely captured, and then the army's vanguard kept moving towards the neighboring Toledo of the Kingdom of Spain. In the world, not only did China have traitors, but in the face of the powerful offensive of the 5-star Army, there were also many Portuguese and Western traitors. In order to survive, they took the initiative to become the guides of the Xianxia army. They helped to occupy the land of the 2 countries, and helped to plunder the wealth of the 2 countries. In just 3 months, the bright red flag of the 5-star Army was planted all over the borders of Portugal and Spain. It was worth mentioning that when Gao Xiong led the army to attack Toledo, he also found a railcar construction factory here. This was all bought by the merchant Garcia at a high price from Resin City. He originally wanted to use this to start an industrial revolution in Spain. And now, all of this fell back into the hands of the 5-star Army. As Yang Chendong expected, it was all for the development of Xianxia. The occupation of Portugal and Spain was just a microcosm of the Xianxia Navy's conquest of the West. Things like this were happening all the time. One after another, Western countries were destroyed, and one after another, vast lands became a part of the Yang family. And this kind of war would continue until one day, Xianxia's 5-star flag was planted in every corner of the Western world. Baiming capital. Zhu Qiyu, the Daizong, finally passed away due to illness. In 1469 AD, his son, Zhu Jianji, succeeded the throne and was given the title of Hezong. It was a symbol of peace. It was just a title, and it could not change everything. Baiming's strength was rapidly weakening. If not for the fact that Xianxia was still consolidating the fruits of his victory over the Southern Ming Empire, Baiming would have followed in the footsteps of the Southern Ming Empire. Obviously, Yang Chendong did not have any intention to attack Baiming. In the 3 battles that he had fought against the Southern Ming Empire, More than 10,000 Han soldiers had died. It was enough. Now that he was going to deal with Baiming, Yang Chendong hoped to take over everything in a more peaceful way. He believed that he could do this. Zhu Jianji succeeded the throne. Although he did not like power, and he did not even want to be the emperor, he was still in power. However, he was still in power and had just ascended to the throne, so he still wanted to do everything he could to turn the tide with his own strength. One of the things he did was to take back some of the power of his teacher, Su Yozhen, and personally handle the affairs of the country. Although Zhu Jianji did not show any ambition for power or political methods when he was the crown prince, no one could underestimate an emperor. However, no one could underestimate the power of an emperor. The day Su Yozhen really took over the throne, when the northern Ming's genie guards and eastern faction guards were completely under her control, Zhu Jianji saw the drawbacks in some of Su Yozhen's actions. He really couldn't understand how his late parents could pass such an obvious act of cheating the country by using money to buy officials and crimes. After taking away Su Yozhen's power and confining her at home, the young and energetic Zhu Jianji began a 2-year-long journey of reform. Regarding this, Yang Chendong had been watching from the sidelines. He also wanted to see what this young emperor, who had never appeared in history, would do. Would he really be able to change the entire northern Ming dynasty into a brand new state? Clearly, Yang Chendong was going to be disappointed. Zhu Jianji, who only wanted to rely on his own strength, was still too young. He did not understand the way of the emperor. Although many of his ideas were good, and he had used a few ambitious young officials, the road of reform was not so easy to walk. When it came to the interests of the conservative factions, even the emperor would be defeated and forced to leave Maiqing. After 2 years of tossing and turning, the orders from above could not even leave the capital's Shuntian prefecture. Zhu Jianji, this young emperor, was also resisted by more and more officials. At this time, Su Yozhen once again had a place to use her skills. More and more officials sought her out, hoping that she could stand up and preside over the situation. When necessary, they were even willing to lower their heads to Bugnam of Gojoseon. These people were not stupid. They could already see that if they allowed Zhu Jianji to continue tossing and turning, it would not be long before their wealth would be greatly reduced. If the reform continued, their lives might not even be saved. In contrast, if they surrendered to Xianxia, they would at least be able to live peacefully and keep at least 20% of their wealth. In comparison, this result was much more acceptable. Under the numerous calls and shouts, Su Yozhen walked out, half unwilling, half unwilling. In the Imperial Palace, she and Zhu Jianji, the Emperor of Peace, talked from morning until night. No one knew what they talked about, but not long after Su Yozhen came out of the Imperial Palace, Zhu Jianji announced that he would be recuperating in the Imperial Palace due to his poor health. Thus, the power of the court returned to Su Yozhen's hands. As soon as Su Yozhen ascended to the throne, the first thing she did was to send people to Wu Nanwang to ask for peace. She also expressed that they were willing to perform the courtesy of a subject, willing to give up their political power, and willing to let Northern Ming become one of the Yang faction's forces, a part of it. If it were 2 years ago, if Su Yozhen dared to say such a thing, he would definitely be condemned by thousands and cursed by tens of thousands. But now, not a single person stood up to oppose this. Perhaps they had already seen that Baiming had no other choice but to be swallowed up by Xianxia. The only difference was whether they had to submit after a fight or submit peacefully. None of the officials in the Imperial Palace stood up to oppose, because they had always been in favor of peace. With the idea of emphasizing culture and restraining military force, it was better not to go to war if possible. After dealing with the civil officials, only the military generals were left. As a powerful figure in the Baiming army, Shi Hang had already quietly set out at this moment and came to Shi City, one of the cities built by Bugnam of Gojoseon. This time, he came to ask for peace, or to put it bluntly, he came to surrender. Marquis Wuxia Shi Hang had already received the news that the Xianxia army general had been secretly taken down by the Deputy General Su Dai. Now this army was secretly moving towards Datong. It seemed that they were going to take Datong. As for the Datong army general Sun Hong, he was old. In these years, because Baiming and Xianxia got along well, there was no war. The Imperial Palace had already cut off the other party's grain and provisions. Datong was constantly referees and soldiers, and it was no longer as prosperous as before. Once the Xianxia army entered Datong, it was obvious what the result would be. At this moment, if Shi Hang did not make the right choice, he would not be given the chance to surrender in the future. As the saying goes, the one who strikes first gains the advantage, and the one who strikes later suffers. Shi Heng took the lead. This great general, who was the best at taking advantage of the situation, took the initiative to come to Shi City to express his sincerity in surrendering to Xianxia. Tiger's man was not surprised at Shi Heng's arrival. In fact, he had been waiting for this moment. Otherwise, as a member of the military committee, he would have gone to Qiqian City to take up his new post. Seeing that Shi Heng had finally appeared, he could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. The man had feelings for the woman, and the woman had feelings for each other. The following negotiations were naturally very smooth. Shi Heng's request was not high. He just wanted to save his and his family's lives. He probably also knew that over the years, he had fought many battles with the five-star army, although they all ended in defeat. However, he had also killed the soldiers of the five-star army. Who knew if they would bear a grudge against him? He did not dare to ask for too much. He only asked for his old life and the safety of his family. Regarding Shi Heng's tactfulness, Hu Mang did not make things too difficult for him. It was still the same sentence that the young master often said. The Baiming army was also made up of Han people. They would not fight their own people. In this way, in just over an hour, it was agreed that Shi Heng would take his 300,000 Baiming army and surrender to Xianxia. As a reward, Xianxia would not make things difficult for Shi Heng and his family after this. He would leave half of his property. Shi Heng was very satisfied to be able to keep half of his property. Compared to other rich people who would easily hand over 80% or even 90% of their property, Shi Heng was very satisfied to be able to keep half of his property. After the important matter was discussed, Shi Heng chatted with Tiger's man while drinking tea. The atmosphere was very harmonious. Seizing the opportunity, Shi Heng carefully probed. "General Hu, may I know about the deputy commander-in-chief of Xianxia?" Tiger's man's lips curled up slightly. He knew what the other party wanted. At this time, he was not afraid that the other party would know. He casually said, "Shi Ho, you are asking about Deputy General Su Dei, right? In fact, he has been a member of Xianxia for 10 years. Oh right, he was personally recruited by Bugnam of Gojoseon. He has always been in the Baiming army as a spy." A flash of surprise appeared in Shi Heng's eyes. He praised himself in his heart and started to rejoice that he had done the right thing. Since Yang Chendong could arrange a spy in the Xianxia army, who knew if he had such a spy by his side? If he resisted until the end, his head might be chopped off by one of his subordinates before the war even started. After learning the truth, Shi Heng was even more determined to surrender. He cooperated with the five-star army, and 300,000 Baiming army soldiers became captives of the five-star army. Not long after, good news came from Su Dei. Due to the fact that Datong's general manager Sun Hong was unrepentant, he still wanted to compete with the Xianxia army despite the disparity in numbers. After sleeping for one night, his head was chopped off by an inconspicuous soldier beside him. Because of this, the leaderless Datong army could only choose to surrender when the Xianxia army arrived at the city gates. The rebellion of the border army had opened the western gate of Baiming Morning. After the new five-star army commander Shi Wanshan pacified the Yusang region and rested for a year, he led his army into Baiming. The army headed straight for the capital of Baiming. The army passed through the Xian Mansion, Huailai, and Juyong Pass. When the news reached the capital of Baiming, the civil and military officials in the Imperial court were all shocked. They knew that Baiming was no match for Xianxia, but they had never expected that the army would surrender without even fighting a single battle. In the Imperial palace of Baiming, Zhu Jianji, who had already stopped his reforms and handed over his authority, did not have any change in expression when he heard this news. All of this was within his expectations. In the 2 years that he had been in power, he had always felt a large hand obstructing him, as if everything he wanted to do was fraught with difficulties. At that time, he had already predicted that this day would come. With a sigh, Zhu Jianji issued an order. "Someone, summon junior teacher Su into the hall." Around 2 hours later, Su Yozhen entered the main hall of the Imperial Palace and saw Zhu Jianji seated in the throne room. "This subject pays respects to your majesty." It was only a bow. Given Su Yozhen's status as the emperor's teacher, it was common practice to not kneel unless there was a major event. "Someone, give junior teacher a seat." "Thank you, your majesty." Zhu Jianji waved his hand, and all the eunuchs and maids in the hall withdrew. Once there was no one else present, Zhu Jianji spoke with an ashen face. Junior teacher, we can no longer protect the great Ming dynasty, right? Zhu Jianji's voice was filled with an indescribable bleakness. Although he had no desire for imperial power, fate had made him a descendant of the Zhu clan. At this time, he had to watch the foundation of his ancestors fall into his own hands. That feeling was also very difficult to bear. Su Yozhen, who had long been prepared for this, wanted to persuade this emperor's student to take it easy. But in the end, after opening his mouth, he didn't say anything. He only spat out a word after hesitating for several breaths. Yes. Hearing this almost resolute voice, Zhu Jianji laughed bitterly. He already knew that he was powerless to reverse the situation. But even if he surrendered, he still wanted to know where he belonged. Junior teacher, do you know what our future path will be? This. If your majesty is willing to abdicate, you can travel the world like the Southern Ming dynasty's emperor, and you won't have to worry about food and clothing. If you want to resist to the end, I'm afraid you'll have to enter the king's tomb for the rest of your life. Has junior teacher been in contact with Bugnam of Gojoseon? Hearing Su Yozhen speak in such detail, Zhu Jianji raised his eyebrows and a flame of anger burned in his heart. He had long had a feeling that Su Yozhen and Xianxia seemed to have a close relationship. Now it seemed that it was true. At this moment, Su Yozhen was no longer afraid of anything. Xianxia was going to dominate the entire Great Ming dynasty, so there were some things that didn't matter even if he admitted it. He believed that even if Zhu Jianji knew, he wouldn't do anything to him because there was no need to. On the contrary, if he really killed him, it would only make the situation in Baiming even more chaotic. Yes, Bugnam of Gojoseon sent people to find this subject. Su Yozhen actually admitted it, which was somewhat outside of Zhu Jianji's expectations. At this moment he asked very unhappily, "What? Does junior teacher think that we are inferior to Bugnam of Gojoseon?" Su Yozhen really wanted to say yes. But at this time, it was meaningless to say this. In order to give face to the emperor, he had to say against his will, "Your Majesty, Bugnam of Gojoseon has worked hard for several decades. In comparison, Your Majesty has just ascended to the throne. If you are inferior, it is because the previous emperor didn't have a better foundation. It has nothing to do with Your Majesty. In this subject's opinion, Your Majesty is a wise and qualified monarch." As soon as these words fell, Zhu Jianji's expression clearly improved. Although he knew that Su Yozhen's words were obviously flattering him, he still liked to hear it. Thinking that he really wasn't as hardworking as Yang Chendong, Baiming was already full of holes. He sighed and said, "What junior teacher said is true. Even if the mandate of heaven isn't with us, we can't go against the heavens and change our fate. Thus, junior teacher should be the main person to negotiate with Bugnam of Gojoseon. You must tell them not to hurt our people. They are all innocent." Intentionally putting on an appearance of bemoaning the state of the universe and pitying the fate of mankind was the only thing Zhu Jianji could do as the emperor. At least this way, when history books recorded him, it wouldn't be too embarrassing, right? In the end, Zhu Jianji still decided to submit, although this wasn't outside of Su Yozhen's expectations. However, nothing was absolute. Before this result, he was still somewhat apprehensive. Now that everything was settled, he could finally let out a sigh of relief. He cupped his hands and replied, "Please be at ease, Your Majesty. This subject will do his best to complete this matter. I will ensure the safety of Baiming's people and ensure that Your Majesty will receive better treatment." The last sentence was exactly what Zhu Jianji wanted to hear. Seeing that Su Yozhen understood his intentions, he nodded in satisfaction. Then he waved his hand and said, "All right, junior teacher can withdraw. We are tired." In the 8th month of the year 1471, the Emperor of Baiming and Emperor Zhu Jianji created an imperial edict for Yang Chendong of Bugnam of Gojoseon. 3 years after the annexation of the Southern Ming dynasty, Xianxia unified Baiming and completely unified the entire Great Ming dynasty. After 22 years of division, the Great Ming dynasty was once again unified. The next month, all of the important officials of Baiming's Xianxia rushed to Qiqian City to attend the ceremony. Yang Chendong set up the altar of life, worshipped the ancestors, and announced the establishment of the Great Wuxia Empire. The word big only meant vast. Hua referred to the land of China. Xia referred to the early days of China's history. Descendants of Wuxia was also commonly referred to by later generations. The Great Wuxia Empire completely replaced Xianxia and became the newest, strongest, and largest empire. 4 years later, the Great Wuxia Empire's navy continuously worked hard to unify the Western countries. The Great Migration of the world officially began. Westerners came to the east to be slaves and servants, and Han Chinese went to the west to be masters. Other than some barren and remote areas that had yet to be conquered by the Great Wuxia Empire's army, all civilized lands belonged to the Great Wuxia Empire. The Great Wuxia Empire finally unified the world. Under the chairmanship of Yang Qindong, the new cabinet meeting and military committee meeting were successfully held in Xianxia City. The cabinet elders, Yu Qian and Shen Yu, retired from the cabinet because of their age. They were replaced by the new cabinet elders, Yu Mian and Bai Shuang. At this point, the 9 members of the new cabinet were Luan Shaochen, Wu Qian, Long Tainan, Yu Mian, Bai Shuang, Su Youzhen, former Beiming official, Hu Chongning, Empress Huyan's father, former Beiming official, Shang Lu, former Southern Ming official, and Ma Dali. The military committee was expanded from 5 members to 9 members. They were Tiger's Mane, Lang Song, Gao Xiong, Tian Yu, Tian Hu, Beta Persei, commander of the Black Cavalry, Yang San, director of the General Intelligence Bureau, Yang Si, chief of the Logistics Department, and Yang Wu, commander of the Imperial Guards. After the cabinet and military committee, there were more than 30 governors. They were Governor of East Asia, includes Great Ming, the Mongolian grasslands, Korea, and Japan. Governor-General in Southeast Asia. Sphere of influence includes the Philippines, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, Thailand, Malaysia, and Brunei. Governor-General of South Asia. Sphere of influence includes Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. Governor of Central Asia. Sphere of influence includes the provinces of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Timor. Governor of West Asia. Sphere of influence includes Khan, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. In addition, there were more than 20 regional governors in Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, Central Europe, Western Europe, Southern Europe, North Africa, East Africa, Central Africa, West Africa, South Africa, Oceania, North America, and South America. The governor positions would be changed every 5 to 8 years to prevent any private power from getting too big. The list of governors would be recommended by the military committee and appointed by the Great Wuxia Emperor. In each governor-general's region, there is a governor-general in charge of local affairs, such as the people's livelihood, agricultural development, urban development, taxation, census, education, and other local affairs. There is a military governor-general in charge of local security and garrison security. There is a commercial governor-general in charge of light commerce, industrial commerce, heavy commerce, and resource management, including the development and management of minerals, petroleum, and non-ferrous metals. There would be 3 governors in one region, and each of them would have the power to submit a secret report to the Great Wuxia Emperor to ensure that there would be checks and balances. At the same time, the surveillance, anti-corruption, and intelligence departments would investigate the officials in each region. If there was any corruption or malfeasance, they would be taken down without any hesitation. Because these undercover officers were also randomly transferred and changed every few years, it was impossible for anyone to bribe them. After the 60 governors were appointed, the first thing they did was to stabilize the local people's livelihood. First, they solved the problem of food. Next, they raised the Han people's position in the world. As long as one was a Han person or a Han person, they would enjoy the best treatment. For example, they would receive special treatment in education, hospitals, housing, and business. Even in terms of marriage, only Han Chinese men were allowed to have multiple wives, or Han Chinese women were allowed to have multiple husbands after they had some achievements and applied for permission to have multiple wives. For a time, people all over the world learned Chinese, learned how to write Chinese, and were proud of their identity as Han people. They suppressed other religions and destroyed other languages and books. Anyone who was found to be harboring such things would be punished. If it was light, they would be killed. If it was heavy, they would be exterminated. What the great Wuxia country needed was a voice, a language, a history. In the end, the highest authority of the great Wuxia kingdom was given to the emperor, followed by the 9 members of the cabinet, the members of the 5 military commissions, and the more than 60 governors on the 3rd level. After that, as the creator, founder, and core figure of the great Wuxia kingdom, Yang Qindong was also prepared to let go of his power and become a hands-off emperor. In 1475 AD, which was the 4th year of the great Wuxia country, Emperor Yang Qindong passed the throne to his successor, Crown Prince Yang Bo. With lightning speed, by the time the cabinet, the army, and the various governors knew about this, Yang Qindong had already left the throne and brought his 8 wives to tour the world. When the people of the world heard the news, they all cried. They thought that the great Wuxia emperor did not want his people anymore. Many Han people thought that this was a huge matter. It was not until the new emperor, the second great Wuxia emperor, Yang Bo, took the initiative to express to the people of the world that his father, Yang Qindong, was not abandoning his people. Instead, he was going to tour the world and observe the lives of his people closely to understand what they needed. Only then did the people stop crying and laugh. At that moment, Yang Qindong had truly won the hearts of the Han people. He had truly brought the Han people to the peak of the world. This was something that no ancient emperor could do. His achievements would be recorded in history, and forever recorded in the hearts of countless Han people who were walking towards prosperity and happiness. Yang Qindong's appearance had achieved the ultimate goal of the Han people's reunion and the Han people's supremacy. He did not let down Datsong's help and did not let down the mission given to him by transmigrating in his previous life. He did not forget his original intention. When the Han people walked to the peak of the world, when other races crawled at the feet of the Han people, he laughed. It was a laughter that he had never laughed so heartily in the 20 years since he came to this world. Then, this laughter spread throughout the great Wuxia Empire and was forever imprinted in the hearts of the Han people. The end of the book, when he finished writing these 3 words, he was extremely excited. After 2 years of hard work day and night, he had told a relatively complete story. Although Longzi's update speed was not very fast, it was stable. Since the day the book was published, there had not been a single time when he stopped updating. For 2 consecutive years, more than 700 days and nights, 5 million words could be considered a positive result. Without everyone's support, Longzi would not have persisted. Although his grades had not been very good, he had never stopped working. This was the direction that Longzi had worked hard towards. Since he had started, there must be results. From 2010 to now, it had been like this for 11 years. He also thanked everyone for accompanying Longzi through this journey. In the Book of Military Supplies, there were also many people to thank. Moral Student 609, G. Pingon, L_Rue, Bookfriend 587600743, Bookfriend 582788201, Flame 3-inch Ding, Bookfriend 26784426, Kankansha 202, Bookfriend 57762277, Godblock_Killing God, 13461009964, Ba Daojung, Dazili, and so on. Thank you for your support, rewards, subscriptions, and recommendations. With your support, Longzi will put in more effort to write every story. His new book, The Duke is Fierce, has already begun serialization on the Zhonghing Chinese website. He welcomes everyone to read it and witness a new story with Longzi. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.